Naveen is a serial entrepreneur, founder of Viome, Moon Express, and many other companies. Naveen's mission? Make illness optional. He wants to create also a multiplanetary humanity and has been involved in many global efforts, including creating a women's safety X Prize. Radically change healthcare, save and protect women, and make life multiplanetary, and many others. The session is called Moonshots, innovating to solve humanity's grand challenges. Dear Naveen, thank you so much for joining us today. So Naveen, first of all, again, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for taking the time to join us in Portugal and to inspire so many. The title is Moonshots, innovating to solve humanity's grand challenges. So the first question is, what is a moonshot?
I knew you were going to ask me that. So moonshots are these audacious ideas that on the surface, they look difficult, if not impossible. And it's really about taking an idea, breaking them down into smaller modules. And then you say each one of them looks really doable. And I'm going to give you a framework of how do you create these moonshot ideas. How do you take an idea that looks impossible on the surface and how do you make them real? And that is going to be my hopefully that by the time we leave this session, that each one of you feel that it's in you to be able to do exactly what you want in your life. There are absolutely no limitation. And the only limitations you're going to have is what you can't imagine. So imagination becomes your only limit to what you can achieve. If you can imagine it, you can achieve it.
That's amazing. And examples of moonshots that you're trying to solve. For example, Viome is a great example.
Well, before I talk about my moonshot, actually I want to spend time little about how the things you talked about. Let's take some audacious ideas that have nothing to do with what I'm doing, because I want someone who is listening to this to be able to take one of these challenges and do it themselves, right? So I'm going to give you a framework about how to go about thinking about a moonshot. Then I'm going to give you exactly about what is it take to execute on the moonshot. And then we can actually give an examples of multiple things, whether it is, poverty, whether it is clean water, whether it is the healthcare. And I'm going to give you multiple different industries so you can see that framework applies to everything that we do. So let me start with the framework. To actually execute, to think about a moonshot, all it does is start with asking yourself 3 questions. Why this? Why now? Why me? Why this is really simple. You ask yourself, God forbid I am actually successful in solving the problem that I set out to solve. So even before you start something, you say, assume I'm going to be successful in solving it. Would it help 1 billion people live a better life? 100 million people live a better life. And the reason for doing so is not because you're philanthropic. The reason to do is because you're capitalist. Anytime you can solve any problem, you can build any product, any service that can help 1 billion people live a better life, you can create a $100 billion company. But you never wake up in the morning and say, thinking, what should I do to create a $100 billion company? Making money is simply a byproduct of doing things that improve people's lives. So I want to repeat that because I'm assuming everybody understands. The only way to make money is to do the things that makes other people's life better. So when you wake up in the morning, you don't ask yourself, what can I do to make more money? You ask yourself, what can I do to improve someone's life today? And if you do that day in, day out, you wake up one day and you have an amazingly great company.
I couldn't agree more. And it's brilliant. I think this purpose-driven entrepreneurship is critical. We got so many entrepreneurs, and the question is, are they pursuing money or their dreams? What is the reason they're doing what they do, right?
Well, the point is, it is not mutually exclusive. And I
Right.
think that is the
Right.
fundamental problem we have had, is we think either we're going to do good or we're going to do well. But what really surprising is doing good and doing well are really one and the same. The more good you can do for humanity, the better the company you have already created, right? And that's how you should be thinking. Doing good and doing well are not mutually exclusive. In fact, the only way to do well in a long term is to do good in the long term, right?
And how do we inspire the young generation of entrepreneurs to pursue and create companies who are purpose-driven? First, their purpose, money comes as a byproduct. How do we inspire them to change?
Interesting thing is, this is a misnomer that we have to inspire any. No one can inspire any. People have to be inspired themselves. They have to find their own purpose in life. And the way you know you have found your purpose or not is when you wake up in the morning and you don't jump out of the bed, then whatever it is that you're doing, you should quit that day. That is not your calling. The day you find your purpose, you will not be lying in bed thinking whether you should wake up or not. You will jump out of the bed wanting to solve that problem. Now, this is another thing you constantly hear. It's all about having a passion. Well, let me tell you something. Passion is for hobbies, right? Passion is for losers. The real winners have obsession, not obsession for things, not obsession for people, obsession to solve a problem. Once you find your true obsession to solve something that bugs you so much that you can't sleep thinking about it, and when you wake up in the morning, you can't stop thinking about solving that problem. Once you have that kind of obsession, there is nothing that's going to get in your way of doing that thing. The universe will align itself to make your dreams come true. And the reason the universe aligns itself is you start to send the energy that this is only thing that matters to you in your life. You are willing to give your last drop of blood for it. So find something that you're willing to die for and then live for it.
Absolutely brilliant, Naveen. And what empowers you to have this energy? Can you talk a little bit about the amazing companies you've built and are building, and how they all came about and came to be?
Not quite there yet. Because I don't want this to be about me.
Right.
I want this still to be, so we talked about why this. Then I'm going to talk about why now. And then I'm going to talk about why me. And then I'm going to give an example. And one of the examples I'll give you is how I applied the same framework in starting the companies that I did. Right? Because that at least grounds everything, that these are not abstract concepts. So we talked about why this. Let's talk about why now. Why now actually has two pieces. Number one is ask yourself what had changed in the last 2 to 3 years, but more importantly, what do you expect to change in the next 3 to 5 years that will allow you to solve the problem at scale in the next 3 to 5 years, and this problem could not have been solved 5 years ago. And the reason to do so is you never want to use yesterday's technologies to solve tomorrow's problem, because by the time you get ready to scale, someone will come behind you and absolutely disrupt you. So if you're going to be 3 to 5 years from scaling, you want to actually intercept the technologies of tomorrow to be able to solve the problem. And I'll tell you how to do that. So don't think, oh my God, that's just for someone else. No, it is for you. Now, the second part of the thing is, anytime when you're starting something, never focus on how you're going to do it. You focus on what is it that needs to be done, not how. And this is one reason why most entrepreneurs who are expert in their field are never able to disrupt that. Because the fact is, when they look at a challenge, the first thing they say, I am an expert, I don't know how to do this. That means this can't be done. When you are a non-expert, you know there is nothing that I know, so it doesn't really matter. Someone out there will help me solve this problem. I just need to know what is the problem that needs to be solved. And the way to do that is you take a problem and you break it down into multiple pieces. So let me just take an example of that, and then I'm going to come back and apply that. So let's assume you say, I want to live on Venus, right? Okay. Then you say, you don't say that's never going to happen. You say to live on Venus, what needs to happen? Number one, excuse me, you have to be able to leave Earth orbit, the Earth gravity well. So first problem we need to solve is to be able to leave the Earth gravity. Number two problem we need to solve is to go all the way from Earth orbit all the way to the Venus orbit. Number three, you have to be able to land on Venus. And number four, find a way to live on Venus. There are only four problems we have to solve. And then you start to say, okay, leaving the Earth orbit, we know how to do that. We call them rockets. Great. That problem has been solved. There is nothing need to be invented there. Then they say, okay, how do we go from Earth orbit to Venus orbit? And we said, look, we have taken Horizon aircraft beyond our solar system. Of course, there were no humans. We may have to modify some systems, but we do know how to travel long distances, and this is an incremental problem that needs to be solved. The third is landing. Well, we landed on Mars three different ways. We did the parachute, we did the cranes, we did the bouncing ball. And maybe the atmosphere on Venus may be slightly less, and maybe some of these technology may have to be slightly modified, but it is an incremental problem. And the fourth problem is really about how do we create a habitat on Venus. And that brings me to my last question, why me? And it is all about the questions you ask are the problems you solve. What are the questions are you asking? And this is the most important thing. If there is one thing I can share with you, the biggest thing will be asking the right questions. The questions you ask is the problem we solve. So now I want to spend a little bit more time on this particular thing, because once you get this right, and the first time when I explained it to you, you're going to think, oh my God, this guy is crazy. But third time, you're going to say, I get it. So let's take one problem. We talked about world hunger. Let's start talking about world hunger problem. People say one day, what if there are 20 billion people on planet Earth? How are we going to feed them? And every expert will tell you that means you have to increase the yield of the crop. You have to grow more crop. Number two, you have to reduce the wastage in the transportation, because amount of food that's wasted during transportation is too high, and we have to solve that problem. You have to really have to grow the food in the vertical farms where people live, and on and on and on and on. And no expert will ever ask a question, why do we eat food? When you ask the question, why do we eat food, you realize you need energy and you need nutrition. What are the different ways can you get energy? The plants get energy from photosynthesis. There are bacteria that are growing in radioactive nuclear waste. That means these bacteria have figured out how to protect their genetic material, DNA, from radiation, and use radiation as a source of energy. What if you can take a genetic material from these bacteria, use CRISPR in vivo to modify our cells, and next thing, not only you are radiation resistant, you're also using radiation as a source of energy. Honey, do you want to go out and get some radiation? Not, honey, do you want to go out and get some pizza? Right? It suddenly changes everything simply by asking a different question. Suddenly, why do we eat food opens up the possibilities of solving a problem using the things that you never would have thought unless you asked that question. It may have nothing to do with growing food, right? And that's the power of actually understanding, asking a different question, asking the right questions. The second part of asking the right question is, are you solving the symptom of the problem, or are you solving the root cause of the problem? And then I want to bring it to the second challenge you mentioned about clean water, right? So if you look at we know that fresh, clean water is one of the biggest problems in third world countries. So many people die because they don't have access to fresh water. if you are an entrepreneur, you say, you know what? I know exactly how to solve the problem. I can build a nano straw that's going to have a filter in the straw that can actually take the dirtiest water and you can drink through the straw and it will take out all the impurities, and that solves a clean water problem. Until you ask a question, why do we have a shortage of fresh water? We live on the planet that's full of water. Where does all this fresh water go? Well, it turns out majority of the fresh water, which is not salinated, is actually goes to grow the crop, agriculture. The most amount of water we use, fresh water, is in agriculture. So you say, oh, I need to solve the agriculture problem. And now you're thinking about building aeroponic farms, aquaponic farm, hydroponic farms, and you're looking at all different ways of solving the agriculture problem. Until someone says, we have so much agriculture. People can't eat all that stuff. Where is it all going? Guess what? It turns out majority of the agriculture is used for feeding the cattle. It is the cattle that takes most of the agriculture. And then you say, oh, if that is the problem, I'm not going to be a moral person telling people not to eat the meat. What if we can grow the meat in the same way as nature does, but do them in a bioreactor? Take a stem cell and only make the muscle tissues. Don't make the eyes. You're not going to eat the eyes. You're not going to eat the ears. So don't make any of the organs you're not going to eat, and take the stem cell, only grow the organs that you're going to eat. And suddenly, you take the fresh water problem, it becomes a synthetic biology problem where you're still eating the meat. You still have all the things you need, but now you have plenty of fresh water that is available to humans. And now you have solved the root cause of the problem, not simply the symptom of the problem. Does that make sense to everyone?
I think 3D printing of meat is a brilliant example.
Now, let's take another example of taking these questions, and now I'm going to answer your question, how did I apply? So one of the things
we want your secret. That's why I'm emphasizing.
I'm going to tell you the secret. So this is another learning. So you will realize this. I started a company called Viome. That's V as in Victor, I-O-M-E. And someday I'm going to tell you a secret. Indians cannot pronounce the word we. And why would you start a company and name Viome that you can't pronounce? But that's for some other day. I just fell in love with the word. The we is life, and omics is science, the science of life. And I wanted to call it a Viome. That is really a science of life. And as I was there to think about it, I am not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. And what's really interesting is this is my 7th company, and I've never started a company in the same field twice. Because I believe the day you become an expert in something is the day you become useless in that field. The reason for that is very simple. Once you become an expert, the best you can do is to be 10% better than someone else. But you'll never be 10 times better than someone else because you're still thinking the same way as everyone else. What makes you an expert is the foundational knowledge. And the more you know, the less you're likely to challenge what you know, because then you can't be an expert. If you don't believe what you know, then how can you be an expert? So the fact you're an expert, you always take the foundational knowledge for granted. And that's the reason why experts can never disrupt a field that they are in. Now, so here I am, and you're going to be hearing from Bob very soon. So Bob, Barney, and I, many decades ago, started a company called Moon Express. And guess what? Here we were trying to solve a problem of mining the moon for helium-3 for fusion reactors. And we became the first company ever to get a permission to leave Earth orbit. President Obama signed into the act, the Space Resource Act. That means anything that we bring back, we get to own it rather than the country used to own it. And the third was we became one of the 6 companies to get a NASA contract for $2.6 billion. And you would think that we will be on top of the moon. And guess what happened? here I was, my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Not only I didn't know that he was sick, let alone he had stage 4 cancer. He was given 3 months to live, and unfortunately, that's all he got. And it really got me thinking that why we Homo sapiens, we humans, are getting sicker and sicker at a younger and younger age, even though our species haven't really changed in the last 100 years, yet more and more of us are getting sicker and sicker. And what really surprised me was more than just the cancer was that as he was aging, he was 78, I had taken it for granted that of course he has diabetes. That's how it happens when people get old. Of course he has heart disease. He's getting old. Of course he has a high blood pressure. He's getting old. All these things we just assumed as you get old, you're going to get the diseases. And then coming from a data science side, I'm thinking there's nothing in the human biology that should actually determine that whether we're going to get sick or not. And this is what the genesis of my next company, Wio. So I asked a simple question that says, what if? And every great idea starts with what if. What if we can actually understand what changes in the human biology at the onset of these diseases we call chronic diseases, whether it's diabetes or heart disease or high blood pressure or depression or anxiety or Alzheimer or Parkinson's or cancer or even aging. What is it that changes in the human body that causes us to develop these diseases? And if we can understand that, we'll be able to prevent the diseases from happening, we'll be able to diagnose them early, and God forbid, outright reverse them. Right? And that was the fundamental. And I realized to do that is actually really, really simple. What if we can digitize the human body? Understand everything that's happening in the body and use AI to be able to say, this is what happens when people become diabetic. This is what happens when people have cancer. This is what happens when people have depression. And then what if we go back to what 2,500 years ago we learned from a physician named Hippocrates, which he says, let food be thy medicine. And we thought, what if food is indeed the medicine? What if he was right that all diseases begin in the gut? Remember that? So we realized that what if we can actually do that? And that was how I started Wio. So now I'm going to tell you the questions that I asked myself. First thing was, why this? If we can solve the problem of people not developing a chronic disease, would it help 1 billion people live a better life? The answer is, or 8 billion of us. Check mark. Second part was, why now? And we said to solve this problem, 3 things must happen. We have to be able to digitize the human body, which is sequence the human body. We have to be able to process massive amount of data that's coming out of digitization. And then number 3, use AI to be able to solve this problem. We knew the cost of sequencing was coming down. So when I started the company, cost of sequencing was $1,000. And it seemed very high to help 1 billion people. But I realized it has come down from hundreds of millions of dollars. And that means over the next 3 to 5 years, this thing will come down to $100. And today we sit here and the cost has come down to $4.73. So even though we thought we're 10 times optimistic, turns out we were 20 times pessimistic. And that's the power of exponential technologies that as you go along during the day at Unicorn Summit, you're going to hear about those power of exponential technologies. And if Ray Kurzweil is going to be speaking, he's going to tell you about how exponential technologies are so deceptive that because human mind is used to thinking linearly, and when it's exponential, it can't think about it. So I'm going to let go of that and let Ray explain that to you in more detail. Same thing happened on processing. I knew we will never have access to supercomputer, but we can use cloud computing. And the first time when we used cloud computing to actually analyze the one simple sample, it cost us $47. And we thought that's just way too high. We realized in the next 3 to 5 years, cost of computing is coming down, cost of storage is coming down. This cost could come down to $10. Today, it is about $1.25. So everything that we thought, we all knew that AI was going to become more and more powerful, and that's exactly what happened. The biggest part was, why me? What questions would I be asking that are different from what everyone is asking? Turns out, everyone in the industry was asking the same question. I want to know about your DNA. I want to know about your genetics. If I know about your genes, I'll be able to find out what's going on with you. And being in naive, non-expert was, my first question was, does your DNA change when you become depressed? The answer is no. Does your DNA change when you gain 200 pounds? The answer is no. So if you do my DNA testing, I become diabetic, and you do my DNA test, it's still the same. And then I get heart disease. Has my DNA changed? No. Then I die. And you look at my DNA 100 years after I die. We look at DNA of dinosaurs. Same. It's still the same. If DNA can't even tell you you're dead or alive, how will it ever tell you you're healthier or sicker? And that was my first thing was, that cannot be the way to understand what's changing in the human biology. So what do you do when you know nothing? You go to Khan Academy. What happens to DNA? Well, it makes RNA. Your genes are expressed, and that is what happens in the human body. Now, if you know nothing, what's the first thing comes to your mind? Why not just look at RNA? You don't think about it. No one has done it. How are you going to do that? My first reaction was, if RNA is what changes during the diseases, why not measure just the RNA? And that was my first thing.
And it brings us to a question.
Yeah.
As you said, experts narrow their mindset. So the questions are not as open as a naive person. That's a brilliant thought. So let's talk about education. How do we change that?
I'm going to come back to that. It's quite not there yet. So the second part of the puzzle, I know he's supposed to ask me questions. So
But I'm really curious.
I will come back to education.
Because I think there's a shift in mindset.
I'm going to get there.
Trust
Me, I'm going to talk about education next. So second part was 99% of all the genes that are in our body that don't come from our mom and dad. Think about that for 1 second. 99% of all the genes in our body don't come from our mom and dad. They come from these organisms that live in our gut, in our mouth, and all over us. 2 million to 20 million genes are produced by these gut microbiome, oral microbiome, skin microbiome, all over you. And these change how human immune system and how human genes are expressed. So point is, we basically started a company that completely measures all the genes that your microbiome are expressing, all the genes that immune system, all the genes in your mitochondria, all the human genes. We look for 100 million biomarkers. And I want to just end it here. We can, by analyzing that, not only we can tell you what's happening in your body from your biological age to your immune health, to your gut health, to your oral health, your cognitive health, your heart health. We can tell you if you should eat spinach or not because your oxalates are not being metabolized. Is broccoli good for you or bad for you? Is avocado going to harm you or is going to help you? And guess what? By simply changing the diet and the nutrition, we did the double-blinded placebo-controlled study where we show people who had IBS, 64% of the people became healthy in 90 days. Depression went down by 48.8%, anxiety down by 47.4%, and diabetes down by 30% in 90 days. And using the data, we are able to detect stage 1 cancer in your mouth or throat. And this is my biggest satisfaction. In 3 months, we are launching a test for detecting the stage 1 pancreatic cancer that has never been done. From a guy who has no degree in science, no degree in computing, no degree in AI, and not being an MD. These are the kind of problems you can solve when you absolutely determined to do that. And don't let someone tell you that you know nothing about it. Your biggest asset is that you know nothing about it. So every time when you want to go out and do something, and someone tells you, what do you know about it? And he says, you know what? Nothing. And that's my biggest asset.
That's about brilliant. Thank you, Naveen. So it's about questioning the assumptions. What we typically assume as obvious, we have to question those assumptions, right?
So I'm going to talk about, you want to talk about education or
Education,
mindset?
please.
Education
Yeah.
or mindset? Education?
Education, please.
Education. So think about our education system. It was designed in the industrial era for one reason only, to produce millions of accountants, the millions of people who can do the machine operations, and the millions of people who can be lawyers. It was designed at the time that whatever skill you learned, you can use rest of your life and you can be actually a productive citizen of society. Today we live in the world that by the time you graduate, the skill that you learn actually becomes obsolete even by the time you graduate. So you have to fundamentally change education system from skill-based learning to learning to learn, learning to solve problems. How do you take something that was designed to teach you a skill and really teach you about how to learn something completely new, right? Instead of fixed time variable learning. What happens when you go to college? You take a course. If you understand really well, you get A. If you don't understand well, you get D. But then you move on to the next thing. What if it was more like a video game? It doesn't matter whether it takes you 1 day or 1 year. Until you master the level 1, you don't go to level 2, right? That means if you're really, really good and you master the level 1, instantly you're at level 2. But if it takes you a month, you got to master that level before you go to the next one. So you change from fixed time variable learning to fixed learning variable time. Instead of really thinking about learning skills, you're learning to solve problems which are multidisciplinary, right? What education system does is kills your creativity, right? When you are at an education system and you are doing an exam and you say, no, do you know what the right answer might be to this question? You know what people think? You're cheating. And when you go to work and you ask your colleague, what do you think might be a way to solve this problem? You're considered a good team worker, right? When you go to the education system, they give you the question, and if you think there is more than one right answer, you're wrong. There is only one right answer to every problem. And when you go to work, what do people say? There are many ways of solving that problem. So everything that education system is teaching you is completely wrong. And that's what you have to change. It is about reinventing the education system. Its education system is not obsolete. It is simply needs to be reinvented for the current need. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. So I don't know how much time we have, but do you want to talk about
Almost
mindset?
there. Oh, we're closing very quickly. 2 minutes, that works? Huh? Perfect. Can we do a 2 minutes?
2 minute mindset.
That'll be brilliant.
All right. So in the mindset, the biggest change you have to really do is to ask yourself, what if something is possible, right? So this is about being intellectually curious. And this is going to be my last word, not only just about for yourself, but also as a parent and as a leader. And that means, how do you make yourself intellectually curious, and how do you make your children intellectually curious? If there is one gift you can give your children, is nothing but making them intellectually curious. So your job is not taking them to the water and making them drink. Your job is to make them thirsty. And the only way you make children thirsty is by making them curious. And let me give you one example, and that's where I'll stop. So if your child comes to you and says, Dad, Mom, look at the beautiful blue sky. Most of us will look up and encourage them. Indeed, it's really beautiful. And what you just missed out, and it's a beautiful teaching moment. What you're supposed to tell them is, son, there is no sky. The sky is a figment of our imagination. It's simply the blue light that scatters, and we think there is a barrier called sky. And by the way, there is no color blue. It's simply the electromagnetic waves that are hitting your retina, and your mind makes up the color. And the reason is not about you teaching them the science. What you're teaching them is even the things that they can see with their bare eyes, the things they are absolutely certain about. What if that is wrong? And what you're teaching them, that intellectual curiosity, that everything can be challenged, and everything that you believe in, what if that is wrong? You can change the world. So what you're teaching them, that you are able to look at the world and say, yes, that's not blue, because the blue is made up in our own mind. There is no color blue. And once you teach them that is where you start to make it children who will never, ever stop learning. They will never stop thinking. And I can go on and give you the many, many examples of how can you be a good parent as you're going about, because they're the same set of leadership skills. Instead of reading them the story, what if you ask them to tell you the stories about unconnected things? This is how their brain starts to connect the dots on the things that are not connected. Tell me a story about a monkey stone and an ocean, and suddenly this mind starts to think how these things can be connected. Right? And anyway, so I'm going to stop here, since I think there are more beautiful, I think, more creative and more intelligent speakers after me, and I don't want to take away their time here. But please find me. If there is anything I can do to be helpful to you, just know I'm here to give back to you. So find me, and let's continue to have a conversation where each one of you feels comfortable that you can go out and do things that's going to help billions of people live a better life. Dream so big that people think you're crazy, and remember, there is no failure. You only fail in life when you give up. So don't ever give up. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the brilliant, not just brilliant, but inspiring Naveen Jain. Naveen, thank you so much for inspiring humanity as a whole. Thank you for everything you're doing. I've been following, your different companies. Your family, your kids are amazing. And what Naveen spoke about education, you can see it reflected in his children and Anu Jain children success that comes, in fact, from that shift in mindset. And we can indeed change the world. Naveen is a great example of that. No one better than you to open the Unicorn Summit. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing for humanity. I'm looking forward to see you next year. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.